So the format today is I'm going to cover the acknowledgement of country and a brief introduction on Science Week, and then we'll hear from our speakers, and if people are interested, we've got a short question and answer session, and we'll follow that with afternoon tea. So welcome to UNE's University of New England's future campus. This is the vision of UNE, how they see education will be going forward from this time. This is our facility here and then also across the road. There's three key points to our charter here in Parramatta, and that's supporting our current students, it's recruiting new students and engaging with our local community. So today this is one of those events, engaging with our local community. Firstly, I'd like to make recognition of our traditional owners with our acknowledgement of country. So the University of New England respects and acknowledges that its people's programs and facilities are built on land and surrounded by a sense of belonging, both ancient and contemporary, of the world's oldest living culture. In doing so, UNE values and respects Indigenous knowledge systems as a vital part of the knowledge capital of Australia. The University of New England acknowledges and respects the cultures of this land's traditional custodians, the Darug people, whose stories have been part of this land and water since time began. We pay homage to present custodians and their ancestors who treated this land and water with respect through wisdom and understanding that ensured resources for our sustainability. UNE also acknowledges the present Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who now reside within this area, and those who may be present today. So welcome to Science Week lecturers at UNE. So our topic today was Everyone Needs Science in Their Lives. So National Science Week is Australia's annual celebration of science and technology, and thousands of individuals, from students to scientists to chefs and musicians, get involved, taking part in more than 1,000 science events across the nation. Science Week is designed for everyone. It's definitely not restricted to schools and universities, with events and activities and talks and shows for every age group. It provides an opportunity to acknowledge the contributions of Australia's scientists to the world of knowledge. It also aims to encourage an interest in science pursuits among the general public and to encourage younger people to become fascinated by the world we live in. So Richard coined the phrase that we stand today at crossroads in our economic development. We need to find new ways of being part of the global economy through innovation and creativity. The use of the scientific method is one of the ways to achieve this. As part of National Science Week, the Royal Society of New South Wales, in association with the University of New England Future Campus, is running a miscellany on science and education, adult learning and management. The Royal Society in New South Wales is concerned with progress in science, art, literature and philosophy. Today's talks, we'll have the Emeritus Professor Bryn Hibbert, and he will introduce the Royal Society of New South Wales. Then we'll have Professor James Kehoe, and then we'll have Charles Greenaway, and followed by Dick Davies. So I'll now call on Professor Hibbert to come and speak, but I'll just give you a brief background. He's Emeritus Professor of Analytical Chemistry and President of the Royal Society of New South Wales. Bryn Hibbert occupied the Chair of Analytic Chemistry at the University of New South Wales since arriving from England in 1987 until his retirement in 2013. His research interests are in meteorology and statistics in chemistry, ionic liquids, and electroanalytical chemistry. But he also does a sideline in expert opinion, scientific fraud, and presenting science to the public. More recently, he's become a go-to expert witness in matters of drugs, of abuse and sports. He's president of the Royal Society of New South Wales, and he's published around 250 papers, 5 books and 3 patents. Bryn.
Well, thank you. I think you've just more or less said what I was going to, so I shall say no more. But thank you very much for inviting me and being able to participate in this in today's proceedings, as it were. My job is simply to say hello from the Royal Society of New South Wales, but I would thank Richard Greenaway for helping to organise this. I think I met him almost when I arrived from England in 1987, so I've known him an awful long time. and so thank you to him. I'm president of the Royal Society of New South Wales. We claim to be the oldest learned society in the Southern Hemisphere. So we kick off, as you can see, in 1821, and a very early president, in fact, was Thomas Brisbane of Brisbane fame. And indeed, he was a Scot, and the Royal Society of New South Wales is founded not on the Royal Society of London, but the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And that's where we get our byline for the encouragement of investigations into science, art, literature and philosophy. So we're kind of the hangover from the Enlightenment and try and encompass that in what we do. So as you can see, the history of us, we became royal in 1866. The Royal Society of Tasmania actually is the first royal society in Australia and Southern Hemisphere. We were the second. Victoria came somewhat last. And we've been having monthly meetings, so we're up to the 1,255th, I think, ordinary general meeting of the Society. And in recent years, when we've started a fellowship program and distinguished fellowship program, the Royal Society has really taken off. We've had very good patronage of the governors of New South Wales, particularly Mary Bashir and now David Hurley, who loves us to bits, mostly because we're totally independent, so we get no money from anybody other than the people who pay their membership and fellowship subscriptions. So that makes us reasonably independent, and we can hopefully give very sound and good advice. We've tended to be science-based, but in recent years we are now trying to embrace the art, literature and philosophy. So we've signed up with, in fact, Thomas Keneally, for example, we've just signed up as a fellow, and the artist Pamela Griffith and so on. So we're expanding there. So if anybody is around on the first Wednesday of the month, we at the moment hold our meetings in the Union University and Schools Club down in Benton Phillip Street in the city, and everybody is welcome. They're open meetings. And as you can see, we have about 350 members and fellows, and we would be very happy to see any of you at our meetings. Just to say, are you going to introduce Jim? Oh, well, while I'm here then. So Jim Kehoe, FRSN, Fellow of the Royal Society of New South Wales, in fact gave the talk at an OGM earlier this year, is a professor of psychology. He's a lieutenant colonel in the army, and apparently he's had his kind of his yearly medical he had this very morning. So apparently he is still alive, and that's excellent. So when I heard the themes of this afternoon's proceedings, I thought Jim would be just the ideal person to add a bit of sense and rationality into topics that can go off in all kinds of directions. So I'd like to invite you to come up and do your little bit.
Thank you, Brent. Yes. All right. Well, Matt, I should add that Brent and I, whatever the opposite of a conflict of interest is my stepdaughter and his son are about to get married and give birth to a child. So this is a family affair.
Keep it in the family.
Yeah.
I thought I left my glasses in.
There we go. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. So as advertised, I'm going to be talking about evidence-based advances in instructional design. Education is heavily owes itself to lots of great ideas, but it's only been really in recent years that they've been tested. And I'm going to be going over just a fraction of them. This is 25 minutes. So what I want to talk about today is 4 widely ignored features of learning that many often stuffs up education and stuffs up learning. To be good, use a good bit of Australian vernacular. And then I'll be talking about, amongst that, the evidence-based toolkit for facilitating learning. Some of this will be much more, probably Richard and I talked about, look like it's a standard pedagogy, but substantially improved, to be made more effective, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness and the acceptance of learning. And then I got a few take-home messages at the end. Well, the first feature that's is important about, and this was been known for quite a while, but then one of my mates at UNSW, Professor Sweller, who's, I think, I'm told he probably deserves a Nobel Prize, recognized that there's a simple fact, that working memory, our ability, what we hold roughly in consciousness at any one moment, our ability to juggle things, has a very limited capacity. This was a study in which one of my friends, in the States, gave people, these are the lab rat of modern psychology, the first-year psychology student, a pegboard. And they said, all we want you to do is, we'll give you commands like up to, over, to the left, right, to the left, to. And when they were, and that's all you have to do, is just follow directions. Well, what was found was, as you can see, one command, that's along the bottom there, if you look in the upper, the ordinate, 100% of the people, or nearly all, were able to do that. Probably a small number that was asleep. You'd add two commands, up to, over 3, to the right 3. It dropped down to 90%. 3 commands, up 3, over 2, down 1, drops to 80%, and then you can see it collapses. So the reason, I can say in a room like this, men have trouble following directions is give too many people things at once, and yet too much of modern education and schools, people are told, do this, 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 and this. And it's just immediately, that's just stupid. It's just really denying the data. And the idea that you get in some areas, they need pressure. Rubbish. People, if you're under pressure, that's often one more thought. So you have 3 slots. Now if you're worried, what's going to happen next? You're down to 2. And you can't add 2 numbers together because you need the 2 numbers and the operator. If you don't have the operator, you're dead in the water. And that's a fundamental constraint. And we know no way of expanding that. People can hold 3 things. Now that can vary a little bit as they compile knowledge, but basically you can juggle 3 things at once. So some of you can juggle 4 balls, but I'm not going to worry about that. That's much harder. Now the second important point is that's working memory. It's more or less the stuff we have in consciousness at any one moment. Long-term memory, which is a long-term storage system, which is vast, is not a sequence of recordings. Often people think, I'm just going to memorize it. I'm sure we've all thought, I'm sure when you're in uni or in education, we all probably thought, gee, if I could just had a photographic memory, it'd be great. It's actually quite counterproductive with the few people who have eidetic memories. In fact, long-term memory is really, it works best anyway, when you have an organized compilation of a previous experience. That working memory is accumulating experience in an organized fashion. And this is actually, this is driving legal scholars nuts, because in the law, eyewitness testimony is supposed to be either it's right or it's wrong, or a person's lying or they're not, or and they should remember time, moment by moment what happened. Not true. People take experience and amalgamate it because it's there for the next thing you have to do, not what happened before. So let me give you some data. I said this was evidence-based. So how can one learn a dialogue by verbatim? This is where you think, you got to memorize this stuff. Well, this is a study. This has been done more than once. Is it best to memorize by rote repetition? I suspect many of us learned our poetry when we were in school that way. Just keep saying it and saying it, and hopefully it'll... the opposite, or the complementary version, is analysis of the gist of it, getting the content. And in the task, ordinary people, once again, Psychology 1 students probably, were given and said, look, read and study the scene on the following pages and think about your character. Another group was told memorize it. So that was the extent of the directions, but the emphasis wasn't on memorization. Then they were brought back. They were given like 20 minutes to do this. And then they were brought back sometimes as much as a week later, and they were given the group that was given the gist. Both groups of people were given, here's the line, the cue line. Now respond with what's next. So just the way you do it in a play. Those of you who've been in school plays know this. And what they found was the top 2 pair of bars there, when their scoring was done on verbatim recall, getting the lines absolutely perfect. The people who hadn't tried to memorize, but had analyzed and done the sort of pseudo method acting thing, what's my motivation here, remembered about 40% of the lines, whereas the people who tried to memorize them a week earlier had nothing. When they relaxed the scoring criteria a little bit, well, what if they, it could be verbatim with a few errors, same story. Everything just went up. So the people who, student participants, who were told just instructions, they remembered about 65% plus or minus. So organizing it around a theme, this verbatim stuff, you're able to get verbatim recall, which is probably why the Norse saga, and these people who were memorizing Norse sagas, that's what they were doing, getting the feel of the story. That's how method acting works. Third thing, this is very fast, is active engagement is required for learning and memory. And it's not just unique to adults. Children do it too. Learning does, minimum, first bit of evidence, learning does not occur while you're asleep. There's no evidence for it. As many of us probably tried to put tapes, cassette tapes under our head. Nah, nothing happens. More interestingly, recall is very poor after passive engagement. Simply being an eyewitness to even a salient event like seeing a car crash. This is there's been a huge amount of research done on this now. Doesn't produce veridical recall. In fact, what's the people study, it's been done more than once. Students are shown, a short video of two cars cracking into each other. Then they're asked two questions a week apart. First question is, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, or how fast were the cars going? The other half of the students were asked, how far were the cars going when they collided with each other or hit each other? What's the estimated speed? And the people who were given the question where they were told how fast were they going when they smashed each other had about a 5 mile, and this is American, 5 mile an hour higher estimated speed. And the people had the much more neutral question. So it's very easy to give leading questions. And then a week later, the same people were brought back and were simply asked, did you see, remember that video you saw? Yeah. Did you see any glass on the ground? Well, if they hadn't seen, if they had, hadn't been asked any questions or asked a neutral question, about 15, 20% of them said, yeah, I did. I saw some glass. And then about twice that many, 28, 30% said, yeah, I saw glass on the ground. There was no glass. There was absolutely none. So people often fill in. They take what they have from long-term memory. They don't remember it exactly, so they fill in what was plausible. Two cars smashing into each other, there's a reasonably high likelihood there'll be some smash. So in our experience, our long-term memory is this organized compilation of past experience used to make predictions about the future, as it were, or when it comes. So anticipating there might be glass on the ground is probably not a bad idea. So what's really required for learning and active engagement is focused attention. That's required both to manage load on working memory and also compile schemas, organize experience in long-term memory. So focused attention, and this is active engagement. So simply sitting back and watching, or simply passively reading something, which seems reasonably active, is not enough. There's got to be some sort of focused attention with the aim of organizing. So what a good instructional design has to do, it has to encourage focused attention. It's got to optimize the cognitive load. That's the working memory load. Not too little. As we all know, simply memorizing nomenclature is something very boring. It's disengaging. And conversely, but more importantly, what tends to happen in many training settings is people are overloaded. And so there's a Goldilocks principle there. There is a just right for different kinds of learning. And this is as well as point out, this managing that cognitive load is the first thing a good instructor should do, is not too much, not too little. And I'd say, in practical terms, we probably all do that, is look at the people in the back of the room, especially if you're teaching mathematics or something like that. Because I know I went through it, I was one of the people, someplace in the middle, and the instructor would go, through this example, you can see this, you can see this, you can see this, and they're already up to about four or five steps. And there's three guys in the front, and they go, yeah. And everybody else is going, So there's visible evidence of when somebody's overloaded. So in addition, instructional design has to be tailored to some extent to novices, to a domain, not absolute rank neophytes, but every time we encounter something new, we are novices. It may be only temporarily, but we are. Conversely, either people get proficient, get more experience. They're actually learning. It's not that all that information they're accumulating, that they're organizing, starts to benefit them, makes things easier. And some things that work with novices become counterproductive or at least useless with more experienced individuals. In fact, probably one of the best ways of helping people acquire schemas while not overloading them is the use of fully worked examples and more than one. So I think probably we've all had kids who use the signpost series of mathematics. Anybody remember? No, I don't think I didn't, because I was from another country. Did you go through that? Yeah, math.
I tutored with those. Yeah.
Yes, it's humbly, in my humble opinion, it's a very badly organized way of doing things, because they give the formula, lots of theory, and then an example, and then solve all these. Well, what happens is people get overloaded because they got the formula, they got one example. The formula doesn't mean much to them. You can change with students. I teach a bit of stats. If you change things from X's and Y's to A's and B's, you right away have a problem. They have trouble with it. Not too bad, but what's more importantly, they're trying to solve a problem. They're extensions of the one example they have. That becomes a template, and they're constantly trying to fit square pegs into round holes. And that's why students they look to the back, they grab somebody else, they do anything but actually learn much. What seems to go around that, get around that, is using more than one, 2 or 3 worked examples and letting the students study them with some degree of without pressure or minimal amount of pressure. Keep them away. So this is a study. It's a Dutch study. They took 4th-year technical college students, so much like the students we have around here, probably a little more like TAFE. And they had to learn to apply the Pythagorean theorem to programming machine tools. These were going to be that techie people. In the experiment, first step is all the students received the general kind of little bit of instruction about the geometric theory, and then they were given 4 work. The instructor worked through 4 examples, fairly typical. These guys didn't want to get too far outside the box because you need to convince math teachers and this sort of thing that this is the way to go. Then they split the students into half. The conventional group was told, solve a problem, but here's another worked example. So it wasn't a pure solve the problem case. So it wasn't quite like signpost. The other group, the worked example group, was told, here, study these 6 problems. Just go through them any way you want. Just like the other. Just study them. You will be tested. That's important. And then they received test problems. So they were able to engage with it, but not having that immediate computational burden that neophytes usually fall apart on. They get overloaded. And what did they find? Well, obviously, I've set this up. So this is just an example. A conventional problem was calculate the length of a line P1 and P2. So they were given, it's not a hard problem, nevertheless. The worked example, fully worked out, told them each step of the way what to do. See, now math teachers hate this, by the way. They just, you got to test them, you got to put. No, the answer is definitely not. And the data all suggest otherwise, for beginners, that is, in an area. And then here's what the test problems look like. Well, it's a fairly simple bit of geometry that I won't bore you with. Now, then the important part on the test, the test problem, the transfer test, solving these are all extension problems. There are groups of students who were given worked examples, some with a fair amount of variability in them, others where the examples were all fairly similar, all showed much higher levels of performance on the test than those students who had already solved a lot of problems they had been given over and over again. In transfer, they had learned less. It wasn't a complete failure. So often in the way we teach it, not we personally, but the way things are taught is the intent to get to the top of that learning curve as fast as possible is actually deleterious to learning. Take it for novices. Now, what happens is this is not dumbing things down. It's just slowing them down a little bit, letting the person get a run-up on them. Because as people start to gain proficiency, worked examples start to lose their value. So this was a study done at the University of New South Wales, not by me, where students were given a number of training cycles. This was quite extensive training in increasingly complex math problems of some sort. I don't remember what they are. And early on, you can see that the solid circle, a solid filled-in circle, the worked example group is doing better on the test. But gradually, after somewhere around the third and fourth cycle, the people who've been doing problem solving, who originally are lagging behind, now it looks like they start to benefit. They start to catch up and even overtake. The worked examples start to become problematic. Now, in this case, it was a pure example where everybody stayed in the same condition. The obvious implication of this is start out with worked examples, gradually fade them out. Then you can increase the number of problems and you can have the benefits of both. So, and worked examples, when they actually get outside the classroom, they're common as dirt. I think that actually the best instructional device in the world is a cookbook. They tell you, a good cookbook says, take 2 eggs, here are the materials you need, take 2 eggs, crack them, mix them together. They don't tell you about the chemistry, they don't tell you about the history. It's just to get it done. And novices just want to get something done, to get their confidence. They want to get their hands on it. Then they get interested in the theory and the history and all that kind of thing. But too much in university, and also my other life in the Army, is theory. And that's why students hate lectures and they hate theory, is because it's all this, it doesn't give them any sense of confidence. All they know is, my God, I'm going to have some problems to solve, and they don't have any skills yet. So there's also another thing that's just changed out, has made the modern technology is self-controlled demonstrations. It's one thing to see a demonstration. That goes too fast usually. But now we have on YouTube, I mean, I don't know how many in this room have said, I got to figure out something. I'll go to YouTube or Google and find some steps. And then you have the steps are right there, and you can go through it, and you can back it up, you can stop, go to step. And so things like YouTube and that are just brilliant for that, because they allow the person, it gives them self-control, or control, not self-control, allow them to control it, back it up, check it out, do it again. And that's a bit of modern technology that in the best way, it's allowed people to learn things as they need them. It produces just-in-time learning, rather than a lot of just-in-case learning, which is what we do, which we often do, is train somebody for something they're not going to use for quite a while, and it's not well retained. Role plays are good provided they're fully scripted. A lot of favorite thing in the soft skills side of psychology is, we'll do a role play. Here's some theory. Now you're going to do, and people fail badly. They're overloaded. They're so busy trying to understand their part and do something, they just don't learn anything. But some stuff I've done recently, we give people several examples of fully scripted role plays, good and bad, and then we bring the theory out as teaching points in the discussion, sort of facilitated discussion. Case studies, if they're well done, they can be badly done, sort of thing they use in business schools, simulations in military settings. And another really good form, I think, of worked examples is storytelling. When it's interesting to watch people get together if they're skilled and talk about tactics. I've done some work. I've seen some things with fighter pilots. If you're ever in an officer's mess with fighter pilots, they'll be standing there doing this kind of thing, and the old guys are telling the younger guys stories, and they're learning the tactics, what worked, what didn't work. So that's at the tail end. So in fact, worked examples are all over the place, and we use them naturally when we got too busy being pedagogical. The final thing, how am I doing on time here, is formative testing. Now that's better than rote practice. There's high stakes testing. No, I'm talking about formative testing, which is educational jargon, for testing that doesn't count. You get the feedback, but it's not going to kill your marks if you do badly on it. Hopefully you'll do better next time. But the interesting bit is testing helps. And I've got here on the side, this is not new, Francis Bacon in 1620 says, if you read a piece of text through 20 times, you will not learn it by heart so easily as if you read it 10 times while attempting to recite from time to time and consulting the text when your memory fails. So this is still trying to produce vertical memory, slightly different than we still do it that way. And this was a study to prove Francis Bacon's point, 500, 400 some odd years later. one group, the study group, that's at the top, read a passage twice. And then about a week later, either 5 minutes, 2 days, or 7 days later, they're given a final test. And simply write down as much of it as you can remember. That's all it was. Pretty, sort of nothing special in that sense. The group that was given study tests was told, read the passage once, write down as much of it as you can remember. And then either a few minutes later, 2 days, or 7 days later, they were given a final test. Well, when they were given the test 5 minutes later, the passage must have been easy enough that you got about the same. And this is what produces the difference. The study group looks slightly better. It's not statistically reliable. Nevertheless, this is why people think, I got to cram. Cramming doesn't work too well. With a gap of 2 days or 7 days, as you can see, the group that studied once, tested themselves once, and then tested themselves again after one reading, did significantly better. You still get a retention loss. That's to be expected. So the key principles promoting learning are optimize the load on working memory. Not too much, but not too little. Don't bore them. Organize, don't memorize, by and large. Encourage active interaction with the material through studies of worked examples and formative testing. Formative testing is a good way of getting engaged with the material. And the other thing is, that I try to tell teachers and instructors, is be patient. Students and instructors both want to get to the top of the learning curve as fast as they can. Learning takes time to consolidate. There's all kind of evidence that spreading out training, spreading out practice over days is actually better, works better. Questions? Hey, welcome. Thank you.
We're going to have a panel at the
end.
end.
To the end. Oh, right. I have my water. Now.
Thank you very much, James. I'll just set up the next slide.
Go back a bit.
Sorry.
My name is James. Please do call me
Jim.
Jim.
Okay.
James is when I was in trouble.
Well, I'd like to introduce Charles Richard Greenaway now. He's principal consultant with Greenaway Consulting. Charles obtained his BSc in pure chemistry from the University of Nottingham. He has an MSc in analytical chemistry from the University of London, an advanced management certificate from New South Wales TAFE, and BA Adult Education from Western Sydney Uni. So he has has experience as a research analyst for Aspro Nicholas, analytical chemist with the Wellcome Foundation, and agricultural chemist for CIG, and various quality assurances and training managers positions. So, quality assurance consultant, and currently a learning and development consulting. So welcome, Charles. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, as Monty Python's was wont to say, now for something completely different. I suppose I come to this to talk about connectivism, which I came across recently when I was looking at PrintRest and found there was this thing in a table of various learning strategies, and one of them was connectivism. I didn't know what that was, so I looked it up on Google, like anybody would, and guess what? That was connectivism, because it's basically about using the internet and the World Wide Web as a source of information to learn with. Thought for today, which I quite like. A teacher, if indeed wise, does not bid you to enter the house of their wisdom, but leads you to the threshold of your own mind. So I really think that the educational process in our school system should be about getting people to the point where they can take control of their own learning. And it's not up to the teacher to actually fill their heads up with what the teacher knows, but it's about giving them the opportunity to go out and learn what they need to know. Would anybody disagree? No? This is audience participation, it's okay. And that was down to Cahill Gibran. So, what do theories of learning have to do with science, one might ask? Well, the oldest definition of science is that it is knowledge. And if we look at connectivism as a theory, it can be investigated by the scientific method, which, just to remind you, is observation, develop a hypothesis, experimentation, evaluation, refine the hypothesis, and repeat Now bear in mind, because of that, scientific knowledge is not absolute truth. It's actually provisional truth. And consequently, you could go back 100 years and look through physics books, and you will find they're laughable, talking about caloric and various other things. So what is connectivism? I'll throw it open to the audience. I had a bit of a look around at various images. It could be a balance of yin and yang, because, you know, that's good and evil, or male and female if you wish. Ah, this looks like a good one I found when I looked up connectivism on the internet. So it seems to have something to do with YouTube, and something to do with Facebook, and something to do with Flick, and various other sources. So the internet seems to be part of the process. This is the one I do like, which is why I've got that model over there, which is in fact a half of a geodesic dome, if you like, the bottom half. And Knowles didn't have much to say about that because he was constructivism. Knowledge is distributed across a network of connections. Learning is the ability to construct and transverse these networks. So in fact, this gentleman, Downes, is one of the people who formulated this theory. History of connectivism. George Simon started off in 2004 and 2005, so it's not particularly new. Along with Stephen Downes, argued that the current learning theories were limited and suggested that a new theory was needed. The amount of knowledge in the world is increasing at an extraordinary exponential rate, and the ability to discern important from unimportant is increasingly a difficult model skill to develop. When we are overloaded with knowledge, there's an enormous amount of it. And in one lifetime, you're very unlikely to even learn 1% of any one subject. So there's a limitation. But does that matter? Because is really the process of learning about filling up your mind with a load of information which you may never use, and typically remember that once you've done your university degree, what you've learned is completely obsolete in 18 months. Surely it should be more about learning how to learn. I like this model, which shows a brain connected to a network. And that's what I see is that, and we're even talking these days about in the future we may be able to connect our brains directly to the internet and not have to go through devices. That's an interesting prospect, isn't it? So there's a brain connected. And of course we can connect with individuals halfway around the room, I should say, or halfway around the world. And the point is that this is an exciting new time, just as much as the invention of paper was a major development in education, in that you could actually write things down and remember them and go and look at them again. This use of the internet is another great opportunity and is causing a revolution in the educational paradigm. So here's an example of connectivism, something called a Soul Learning Kit, which I came across on the internet. And it's actually a toolkit for carrying out the process. SOL stands for Self-Organized Learning Environment. It was originally discovered by a guy called Sugata Mitra, who in fact is an Indian professor, now works out in Newcastle in the UK. And he, very clever man, he went and did a TED talk and won the prize, and they gave him $1 million to go and do some research. And he set up 5 schools, 3 in India, 1 in the UK, and I think 1 in Australia, where they actually tried this new method. It's not very popular with the teachers because it doesn't actually require a teacher. So they might see that their future is a little bit limited on that basis. No, it's not. Of course, they'll still be writing courseware. And going to the next slide. You start off with a 15-minute introduction. Now, this process, which I would use with you as a learning group, will take 2 hours. I've got 10 minutes, so I decided maybe I ought to summarize it. Yeah? Okay. So the point is that in 15 minutes you'd introduce it. Then it starts with a big question. Ooh, it's a microphone there. Yes, okay. Starts with a big question. And that can be anything like, will humanity survive past 2030? Or will we go extinct? Or things like that. Or how do we solve some of our problems, environmental or societal or economic? And you can get small groups to work together on that. So, You start with self-organized groups, say 3 or 4 people. And I notice I'm showing this in a business setting because I think it has applicability to business. And they spend 40 minutes with a computer, just one computer between the 4 of them, and they search the net and find information. And then they have a break. Is there a juggler in the house? Ah, sir, please. We'll have a break. I thought these would appeal to Bryn. These are little snacks for a molecular chemistry department party. As you can see here, we've got, this is a cheese ball with 2 mozzarella balls. I think that's supposed to be hydrogen sulfide. And I think this one's, well, those are probably chlorines, and that's a hydrogen. So that would be 111 trichloromethane. This looks like sulfuric acid. That was a grape. I'm not sure about that. I got a feeling that was probably either iodine or bromine, so that's methyl iodide or methyl bromide. And you get the general picture, you know. Can have a lot of fun with that. Juggle away, young man.
You want to go 4 or?
Well, you decide what you want to do. The point is, to survive and have sustainability, we need to juggle the various elements, those being the economy, society, and the environment. And the orange one is actually supposed to be sustainability. It's a different sort of lecture, isn't it? Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that, sir. Oh, do 4. Go on, do 4.
Well, just these balls are a little bit difficult. Yeah, I can do the other.
Oh, that's pretty good.
I could travel with my ones.
That's the point I wanted to make. To achieve sustainability, it's difficult to balance the economy with the environment and with society. And we can't keep on growing the economy at the expense of the environment and society. At the end of the day, that's not sustainable. So we need different ways of learning to find out how we can actually cope with the problems that we're currently facing. Then after they've done their break and had a bit of a think, they come up with doing a presentation, which would take about 30 minutes. And if you say had 4 groups and they did 4 presentations on a particular question, then you're going to get 4 different sets of opinions, and there'll be a lot more sharing of knowledge of what people have found. Because one of the rules I find in learning is if you tell somebody something, it could be either true or false. But if you discover it yourself, then it must be true. So, would you like to know more? Well, I'm Charles Richard Greenaway. I'm representing the Silver Surfers Cooperative because I've got grey hair, hence a Silver Surfer. I think Bryn will qualify as well. Now, that's my phone number and my contact details. And what are the benefits of this approach? Well, you get enhanced computer literacy. You develop the habits of a lifelong learner. If you're going to have 8 or 9 careers in your lifetime, then one lot of education isn't going to suffice for your whole lifetime. You have to learn how to learn so you can take on board the next career. And you're going to have to train yourself because I guarantee there won't be any money from government to do it. Strengthen interpersonal and presentation skills. We've got to work in small groups and you've got to do a presentation. Be empowered to take ownership of their own learning. I think that's vitally important because at the moment we're not. I mean, I've found with students I've dealt with that having gone through the traditional education system, they didn't know how to take control of their own learning. In fact, unless you gave them a standard operating procedure to follow, they didn't know what to do. And interestingly enough, that was particularly a problem with a group of single mums who'd been on the pension for 15 years and had to learn computer skills. And if you allow them to self-learn, that wasn't proper learning because they didn't have a teacher telling them what to do. And if you think about that model, the model which has been in place for about 300 years is really about conditioning people to accept authority and to fit into a workforce. And I don't think that it's right that we carry on in that way. I think we need a revolution, we need a change. And another one has become more motivated to learn about different subjects and ideas. Now, education doesn't just stop at school. You can have your own interests. You can go where you want to go. Why should we limit people by a syllabus? Now, to finish off, the future. What is the future of learning about? here's a YouTube that I found from Sugata Mitra, which I hope will work. And the great man will actually tell us a bit of his views of what the future may hold. Oh, well, what's happening here? Oh. Okay. Now it's going into YouTube, that's good. Oh, this looks promising.
Well, the future of educational technology, like the future of anything else these days, it's a question of how far ahead do you want to guess. You can project over short periods of time. You can predict over slightly longer periods of time. After that, you can only do two things. You can prophesize or you can fantasize. So here goes. In the very short term, the access devices will have changed completely. We are today talking about the tablet phone, which kind of popped up very quickly, before we could almost realize, and it took over everything. It took over the personal computer, it took over the tablets, it took over even iPads, and it's sitting in everybody's pocket. Well, that thing's going to change again, and I don't know exactly how, but I know it will change to a smaller and quicker version. To what sense will it connect? I don't know. Maybe to audio, maybe to video, or whatever. But I think we could predict a change in the form factor of the tablet phone in the near future. A little bit further, let's say about 10 years from now, I think we might start to look at direct connection with the biological system. Knowledge itself is currently, very largely exobiological. It's outside of the biological system. We connect to it using devices. Those devices are getting smaller, and quite possibly they'll go inside in a way. When it does that, then it'll be hard to say whether that knowledge is exobiological or perhaps a part of ourselves. And that is, I think, the 10 to 15 years timeline.
Well, so there we go. Well, I thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A session as we meet as a learned society. Oh, how do I turn this off?
That's okay, I'll look after it.
Okay. Ooh, nice microphone.
Well, thank you, Richard. I'd now like to call on Dick Davies. Dick's going to be talking about using science to improve productivity. So Dick is a technophile who survived 30 years in the computing industry, first as a software designer, then in software development management, and lastly providing leadership to a strategic business initiative. His abiding interest is in business that is focused on what he sees as the scourge of productivity, and particularly of human fulfillment created by so much of the practice of management resulting from today's cult of managerialism. He graduated in philosophy and psychology at Bristol University in England and later spent some time studying strategic management at Western Behavioral Sciences Institute in California. He believes in high quality interaction and respectful working relationships are often an untapped source from which business and those working in them could greatly benefit. So, Dick Davies, thank you.
Do you want the whiteboard, Dick? No. Good afternoon, thank you. Let me first just explain where I'm really coming from. I used to work for Digital Equipment Corporation for a long time until it ceased to exist. I was working, that was an American computer corporation, which when I joined it was the second largest computer manufacturer in the world. I served for some time as their European software engineering manager. And as a result of doing that, I was quite often called into sales situations, one way or another. That left me with a very, very uncomfortable feeling. Excuse me, I have to just correct one thing. Excuse me. Robert described me as a technophile. In fact, I tended to describe myself as a technophobe. It does make something of a difference, but I'm not actually a technophobe, but I do have something of a sort of prejudice towards concentrating on business and on what's in matter in hand. And my experience of technology is that it's the most wonderful distraction that ever arrived. You know, it's a tremendous way to stop doing anything important and go off and have fun. This led me, to propose to the corporation that there may be a tremendous opportunity in being able to establish more fruitful conversations with customers, a closer relationship in business. And the result of this was that I was actually given the opportunity to pursue this. And in fact, I spent 10 years leading a group that was looking at what it actually meant to become closer to customers, to be able to create more value in a relationship and have more fruitful conversations. I'm actually very, very interested. I keep coming back to conversation, so I won't apologize for it, but I'll just warn you in advance. When we were starting this group, we were looking at a number of models, and up to yesterday, I was intending to share a few of the things that our initial research turned up, which seemed to be very helpful ways of just visualizing things better or being able to look at things better. Yesterday, I was looking up theory X and theory Y, and I got so bogged down in it again that I thought this is too important to leave. I'm just going to concentrate on this because I want to talk about the implications of this for where we are now as a society. So if you'd bear with me, what I would like to first do is just recount to you, because you may not have thought of it for a while, just what theory X and theory Y are. This subject made its first appearance about 60 years ago, I gather, at a lecture in MIT, given by Douglas McGregor. His book, The Human Side of Enterprise, actually came out in 1960. And this is a beautiful book still to read. But he formulated this theory X and theory Y. Now, could I ask you, please, to just bear with me? I want to just remind you of what these are. But I want to first say that these theory X and theory Y are not a couple of ideological positions particularly. These are two different sets of assumptions managers might make about the attitudes of the people they manage. So theory X and theory Y apply to managers, but I'd like you to place yourself in the position of being someone working for such a manager. First of all, let me give you theory X. Theory X managers believe three things. Number one, the average person has an inherent dislike of work and will avoid it if he can. There were no ladies present, but at the time when this was written, back in 1960, he did say he, and I would have changed it to she, but I didn't think it was particularly good in this context, because since it talks about dislike of work. Anyway, sorry. The average person has an inherent dislike of work and will avoid it if he can. Second, because of this characteristic dislike of work, most people must be coerced, controlled, directed, threatened with punishment to get them to try hard enough to achieve the organizational objectives. And third, the average person prefers to be directed, wishes to avoid responsibility, and has relatively little ambition and wants security above all. So if that's who you want to work for, find a theory X manager, but that's for you, because that's what you're getting.
A theory Y manager, by contrast, has several characteristics. We've actually run to 6 in this case. Number 1, the expenditure of physical and mental effort in work is as natural as play or rest. Number 2, external control and threat of punishment are not the only means for bringing about the effort towards organizational objectives. Man will exercise self-direction and self-control in the service of the direct objectives to which he is committed. Number 3, commitment to objectives is a function of the rewards associated with their achievement. Number 4, the average human being learns, under proper conditions, not only to accept, but to seek responsibility. Number 5, the capacity to exercise a relatively high degree of imagination, ingenuity, and creativity in the solution of organizational problems is widely, not narrowly, distributed in the population. And number 6, under conditions of modern industrial life, the intellectual potentialities of the average human being are only partially utilized. I think Douglas McGregor was actually quite tactical, quite careful in the way that he said a lot of these things and didn't want to offend anybody, but that's, I hope that by reading those out, I've reminded you of what those 2 pictures looked like. As I said, that was 60 years ago. I happened to work working at Digital Equipment Corporation for one of the most outstanding examples of a Theory Y company that's existed in the last few decades, right up until the end when it failed and was taken over. But up until that time, it had been getting on for 40 years and had been tremendously successful. I think it has been very, very slow on the uptake in other places. Now, I don't want to get particularly into a conversation about Theory X and Theory Y, except to say that even back in the 60s, the book was, McGregor's book was beautifully written, and anybody reading it will get a tremendous sense of awareness of the stuff going on in organizations. What I want to talk about, what I really want to turn to, is what's coming next. We seem to be at a time of tremendous uncertainty. Practically everything that most of us in the room would have been familiar with when we were younger is either cracking up or has gone already. At the moment, it seems to me, wherever I look, that there are an awful lot of people on part-time work, people doing multiple jobs, people worried about low pay, and really struggling with where their future is taking them and how to connect. Secondly, I think there's quite a lot of confusion of competing media around, competing vehicles for connecting people, particularly in social media. This all takes time, it's all a distraction, it's all, in terms of what you were talking about earlier, Jim, it adds enormous complexity. Thirdly, artificial intelligence is coming is coming like a train down the track at us, and is now expected to replace a tremendous amount of professional work over the next few years. Governments, I'm not trying to be political here, but governments, as far as I can see, wherever you look, have very little awareness of this and are not really taking any form of leadership in how to respond to it. I think in education, if you look at it in education and in training, there are a tremendous number of initiatives, and a lot of them are very, very good. But once again, to the poor punter wondering what to do, it's confusion. And finally, the rate of change is not slowing down, it's going to keep on increasing. My point is this: I talked about conversation earlier. People are granular, fragmented, and very much struggling to reach one another, or could I put it another way, separated from one another. I think there is a tremendous need for new forms of institution to start to emerge and start to form so that people can start helping each other. I'll put it no higher than that. People can start helping each other by doing the basic things from psychotherapy, for example, by simply taking each other seriously, giving people positive regard, listening to other people, and getting towards some proper conversations as opposed to spending time batting stuff around and avoiding proper conversation. Proper conversation often includes confrontation. It includes, respectful. It's possible to be very respectful and very confrontative. If there had been a big audience here, if there'd been a while, I would have been trying to say, can we at this point, no reason why I can't say it now, but can we at this point just join in, because I want to hear what everyone has to say. I would like, no one is helping by feeling shy to speak, too shy to speak, or by worrying particularly. We can look after ourselves. If we don't like what you're saying, we'll let you know. Anyway, I was talking about the assumptions that McGregor made about management. I would raise the question again, what assumptions should we be making now about how we engage with one another? That's a question we could talk about. Should we be competing for what's on offer or cooperating in building new opportunities? That's a very serious matter, I think, in this. There are an awful lot of people who go to work each day and feel very, very much in a competitive position. They want to hang on to what they've got. They're afraid of letting anything go. They're afraid of working with other people. Another thing I'd just say to you, and I'm simply a person who's lived here now for 14 years, I hear the word boss far, far, far too often. The word boss has a funny Theory X feeling about it. And Theory Y has not taken hold in Australia in the way that it might have done. I think that much is clear. So is it compete or is it cooperate? Another question I'd like to say is who is there to look to? Does anybody believe the government is going to solve this? Where do you go that you won't be treated like essentially a commodity for which a certain number of boxes can be ticked? And quite frankly, do you know how busy I am? I'd great to have more time to spend with you, but I haven't got got to get on to my next thing, and that only deepens any sense of alienation. How could science and technology help? That's not a quick question. I'm not expecting somebody to say, oh, these are things that I think need sets of people to be willing to give time to. I think I'm very much with Richard and what he's talking about. The internet can be very helpful, but quite frankly, I think it's very, very important to get onto some kind of level with other people before we start turning to computers. If you turn to computers after that, it can be very, very helpful. What changes in assumptions and attitude could help? And finally, and this is a little bit more not more technical, but a little bit more prosaic, but I think it needs to be added into the mix. Why is so little attention paid to Asian opportunities? I don't know if anybody else was listening to Geraldine Doog last Saturday. The point was made by one of the people that she was interviewing on her Saturday Extra show that research has shown that 19% of boards on American and Australian companies have any member on the board who counts as being in any way Asian ready. And yet, apparently, It's the fastest growing part of the world and will soon have half of the world's population and easily half of the world's middle class. Thank you.
So, excuse me, if anybody wants these theory X, theory Y stuff, I've got printouts here to help yourself if you just get it.
Thank you, Dick. So, Richard, given the size, I don't know if you still want to go ahead. We'll have a